Compliance variability is emerging as a balance sheet risk for sustainability and EHS leaders across manufacturing plants, energy assets, rail corridors, chemical facilities, data centers, and distribution networks. Compliance variability is no longer a regulatory nuance. It is a financial planning issue. Federal statutes are clear, enforcement is not. And that difference is beginning to surface in reserves, insurance premiums, disclosure scrutiny, and capital timing decisions. Industrial manufacturing, PFAS liability is no longer abstract under the Safe Drinking Water Act. The EPA finalized enforceable drinking water limits for several PFAS compounds. The agency also designated certain PFAS as hazardous substances under the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act, CERCLA, expanding potential cleanup liability. This rings true for almost every industry, but particularly for manufacturers in textiles, electronics, metal finishing, automotive components, and advanced materials. It affects historical site assessments, wastewater permitting, off-site disposal liabilities, real estate transactions. Some states are moving aggressively to incorporate PFAS standards into discharge permits. Others are moving more slowly. In parallel, citizen suits are increasing in regions with active environmental advocacy. The result is uneven exposure. Two facilities with similar operations can face materially different remediation timelines and legal risk depending solely on geography. That unpredictability complicates reserve planning and long-term capital allocation. Energy, methane enforcement and disclosure alignment. Oil and gas operators and power generators are navigating strengthened methane rules under the Clean Air Act. While federal standards are consistent, inspection frequency, state implementation plans, and local enforcement intensity are not. Some regions are accelerating leak detection requirements and monitoring mandates. Others are slower to operationalize federal updates. At the same time, climate-related disclosure requirements from the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, alongside California's California SB 253, California SB 261, are adding reporting complexity. Energy companies operating nationally must now ensure that emissions data is consistent across jurisdictions. Forward-looking climate statements align with operational realities. Risk disclosures are defensible across regulatory regimes. The financial risk is not just fines. It is disclosure credibility, and disclosure credibility influences investor confidence. Transportation and logistics. Local scrutiny is intensifying. Rail hubs, ports, freight corridors, and fleet operators are increasingly exposed to localized enforcement under Clean Air Act authority and state-level environmental justice policies. Even where national standards remain unchanged, local regulators are applying. Expanded monitoring requirements, tighter permit conditions, greater community transparency expectations. Transportation operators are finding that infrastructure upgrades, electrification, particulate filtration, idle reduction systems are being driven by local enforcement climates. Capital allocation decisions now reflect not just engineering needs, but regulatory geography. Chemicals and materials, disclosure precision matters. Chemical and specialty materials companies face heightened exposure from PFAS liability, hazardous waste rules, and climate disclosure mandates. If reporting definitions diverge between federal SEC requirements and California climate laws, inconsistencies can trigger scrutiny. Even unintentional gaps may invite shareholder questions or litigation. For companies already managing legacy sites, new hazardous designations under CERCLA can alter remediation assumptions and financial reserves. Technology and data infrastructure. Indirect exposure is growing. Data centers and semiconductor fabs often operate with relatively low direct emissions, yet they are increasingly exposed through water withdrawal restrictions in drought-prone states, Scope 2 emissions transparency, siting challenges tied to grid strain. Climate disclosures now require companies to articulate physical and transition risks. In regions where energy reliability is volatile, procurement strategies become material disclosures. Compliance variability here is less about enforcement penalties and more about defensibility and reputational trust. Consumer products and food supply chains spillover. Large consumer brands subject to California's climate disclosure laws must account for Scope 3 emissions. That requirement is cascading to agricultural suppliers, packaging manufacturers, cold storage and distribution operators, Suppliers operating in lighter enforcement jurisdictions may not yet face direct mandates, but they are increasingly being asked to provide emissions data and risk disclosures contractually. Insurance and capital markets are paying attention. Environmental liability insurers are adjusting underwriting criteria based on jurisdictional enforcement intensity, litigation frequency, PFAS exposure, disclosure quality. Premiums in higher enforcement regions are rising. Lenders are also incorporating environmental risk screens into project financing decisions. Regulatory geography is influencing cost of capital. That is a structural shift. The human reality for compliance leaders. For sustainability and EHS leaders, this environment requires judgment, not just technical accuracy. You are being asked to anticipate enforcement posture, not just interpret regulations, align data across overlapping disclosure regimes, explain geographic exposure to finance teams, defend assumptions that may shift quickly. The pressure is not just legal, it is organizational. Across manufacturing, energy, transportation, chemicals, technology infrastructure, and consumer sectors, compliance variability is emerging as a balance sheet exposure. Federal law may be uniform, enforcement is not. Leaders who treat regulatory geography as a strategic risk input rather than a technical detail will reduce volatility and protect capital. Those who assume stability may find exposure appearing suddenly, not gradually. You've been listening to Sustainability Soundbites by Environment and Energy Leader. For partnership opportunities, please reach out to our team.